Thank you, Elliot and the cool guys. That's what I'm calling them. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to the Gospel of John, chapter 10. And I want to begin by saying the words that we've said for 35 years this fall. And we're going to be celebrating since the church started from nothing. We had no funding. We knew no one in the Seattle area. All we had was a dream. And on that very first Sunday, the beginning of the service, I said the words that I often say, or Michael, or Rich, or David, or someone will say during the service, and that is, "This is the day that the Lord hath made, and we will rejoice and be glad in it." I want to share with you about life and how to renew your life and renew your love of life, and from John chapter 10, but I have to tell you, I'm kind of just blown away and deeply moved at having Avery Joy. I got her name wrong already. I constantly do that, and Pastor David's daughter was getting married. She said, "What's the chance that Pastor Tim is going to get my name right? Because what's her new name?" Or Nevia Domsky. So what's the chance? And David said, "No chance." I've been going to the church all along. He's never got my name right once, and when I was down with our grandchildren, Jackie and I were down with our grandchildren in Dallas, I kept calling Isabella Eva the whole time. And then when I got back up here and saw Eva, I called her Isabella. And but my heart's in the right place. So I'm going to love these kids and enjoy them as much as I possibly can while God gives me breath here on this earth. And what a moment of life. You know, I was just startled at how beautiful Avery Joy is. And every time I say her middle name now, Jackie's going to give me a big smile. And because I hadn't seen her before. And I knew she'd be beautiful, knowing her dad and mom and her grandparents and all of her family. But still, you're surprised by beauty, right? It's an amazing experience. And Jesus surprised everyone at the love that he had to give to people and the life that he had to give them. And so in John 10, someone says rudely, "Why did you come here?" And Jesus says, "The thief comes to kill and destroy." They know what their mission is, right? Smash and grab. They'll come and break down your front door and run in and grab something and run out. There are people on a mission. He said, "But I have come that you might have life." Zoe, the invincible force of life, as the Greek term refers to it. It's where zoology comes from. You spend all of our lives kind of fighting back the weeds and all the life that just springs up even on concrete. In our gardens, we struggle to have things grow there, but then on the concrete, it grows all over the place, right? There's this irresistible force of life. And to have it overflowing. So last night in the Saturday night service, Elliot was here leading our worship, and he was sitting in the congregation, and I said, "Who here loves apricots?" And of course, Elliot is the one who's so excited. He lifted his hand and said, I do. And so I chose him to come up here, and I said, "This isn't a prank, but just bite into that apricot." Of course, it was rigged because it was so ripe. Don't you love an apricot that's so ripe that it's going to make a mess with whatever you do? And Elliot bit into it, and it squirted all over his shirt. And as he was trying to talk, it was still slobbering out of his mouth, like happens with any fresh fruit. And my point is that life is ripe. It's right there for the taking. Now, we become hurt in life because life is not easy, right? If you haven't discovered that, you will. Life is not easy, and it's not always fair. And different people have different perceptions of what happens in their lives. But as we go through life, all of us can become injured, and we can do something that's a consequence of that. We can begin to feel sorry for ourselves and to pity ourselves and to nurse that pity. And then we respond to that by, "I need someone else to blame," and so we immediately think of all the reasons why we should blame someone else. And that's so disempowering, because when you're blaming someone else, you put the locus of power in their hands, and they may not even know that you're blaming them. I mean, like, I'll do it whenever the whole United States of America realizes that I'm in trouble here. Well, they're never going to notice. And people that you're blaming aren't going to notice. So you're trapped. And to trap people on earth, Jesus came and he said, my purpose statement, my mission statement is to give life in all of its overflowing abundance, its invincible power to you. That was his mission statement. Well, we're on a series of messages. If you're alive, then it's time to rebuild your dreams. Because as you go through life, there's going to be setbacks. Linda was describing the setbacks, and I kind of placed it up on the left shelf because those are all good memories to me. If you talk to someone who fought in the Battle of the Bulge, you'll say it was tough, but all they remember is heroes. And that's all I remember, is all the heroic actions that it took when we dared to try to build the greatest caring network. And we're not through. God is not through with us yet. There's always ebbs and flows and heroic acts of faith that you could never even fully describe. Someday I'm going to write a book about it, and it's going to be about you. And I'm going to describe the heroism that took place in that. And we had reverse. Churches often have reverse. But we're not through yet. The God who started this church from scratch can restart it. So it's time. If you're alive, I think all of you are alive, right? Except for Jackie. No, she's alive. All of you are alive. If you're alive, whether you're 10 years old or 90 years old, it's time to re-envision, to rebuild, to retool, to get ready to re-equip your dreams. And that's the series that we're on. And I wanted to look at John chapter 10 because Jesus is making a purpose statement about his life. You can't consider your dreams until you go back to the starting point and you ask, what am I here for? Life is God's statement that he still has a plan. And I haven't had a chance to talk to Mike and Becky, but I bet at the moment that Avery was born, you just had a sense that God had a plan for life. And not even knowing what it is. None of us knows the detail, but we have a sense just right now that it's going to be amazing, right? It's going to be more than any of us could predict. We don't know if she's going to become a famous singer or a famous dancer or astronomer or president, but it's going to be great. Whatever she is, it's going to be great. And we have that sense of it. Well, at one time in your life, someone had a sense that God had a plan for your life. Now, I say a perfect plan because from God's perspective, it's perfect. You look back, it doesn't mean you're perfect, doesn't mean your spouse is perfect, doesn't mean that you have an undefeated season throughout your life and never make a mistake, because the Bible says if you say that you're without sin, you're a liar and the truth is not in you. We've all made mistakes. But God doesn't give up, and at some moment, I've been there so many times, you'll look back on your life and God will whisper, perfect. That's the way I feel about my kids growing up. Every one of them perfect. And that's the way I feel about you. And so God has a plan for our lives. It doesn't seem perfect in the process. Maybe only to a grandfather can it seem perfect. And it's exciting. It's beautiful. Remembering what that plan was, what your life purposes are, is so important. So if you want life in all of its fullness, we need to remember what our life purposes are. So here's the exercise for you to do that. First of all, realize the realism of life. Now, I've got the verse in Ephesians that I love from Ephesians 1 and 2, and I'm going to be preaching on it next week, again, the second part of the mini-series within the series. And it tells about the DNA, the amazing things that God's planned in your life. And even though you may not be an expert on genetics, you can sense that, man, this is what I was created for. I'm in my sweet spot right now. These are ideals that I believe in. For me, one of my ideals is that I love science and I love theology. I can't love one without the other. And so that's an important ideal of mine. My life purpose is that to help the people that I love to succeed. That's you. And that means for the rest of my life. And success is finding and achieving God's plan for your life. So when I started as a pastor when I was 18 years old, I've been a pastor for 45 years. God brought an incredible team into my life. We built a youth group, starting actually with 0 the first Sunday I was there, to 300 junior high kids, 500 high school kids, and 30 college kids. I still know all of them. I told them I'd love them for the rest of their life. Last night at 3 a.m., I received a phone call, and it was one of the moms of one of my junior high kids who's 60 years old now. And she said, I just wanted you to know that Dennis passed away. I don't remember him since I was in junior high. I followed all the kids. I stay in contact to some degree. But my heart was broken because I've been praying for him every week since I was 18 years old. And God has done amazing things through his life. No, we have a life purpose. When I love people like that nothing can stop it, I feel like I'm in my sweet spot. My parents tell me stories about me. This is what I was created to do. Last week, I had a phone call from one of the amazing kids that have grown up in the church. There are some of the most amazing world changers at this church that have grown up here, and I'm just awed by them. I'm odd anyway, but I'm in awe of them. And this is a young man who grew up in the church. When I always talked about, I would love to inspire someone who would find the cause and the cure to cancer. So many kids came up and said, I think I'm that person. And almost all of them are research scientists today working on that in some place in the country. Well, this little kid came and said, I'm going to find the cure to cancer. And he called me and said, I don't know what happened to me, but I stopped going to church. And I said, I noticed. You only show up for golf tournaments and you win all of those. And he went on at the University of Washington, it was discovered that he was brilliant in the area of genetics, and so even though he wanted to be a doctor, they pushed him into studying genetics at the research level, and he went down to Baylor, and he discovered disease in just one of his class projects. Became world famous and was lecturing around the world. And when he graduated and got his PhD, Dr. Jeff Dunn was telling me how amazing this is. He got a tenured position at the University of Washington Medical School in his 20s as a professor there of genetics. And then he was hired by Children's Hospital and Fred Hutch to be a senior fellow research person to work on finding the cause of diseases that we can do something about genetically. And so he said, I was on a hike around Seattle, my wife and I. His wife, Carolyn, she went to law school, and she's working for the number one law firm in the world. They have an office in Seattle, and they live in downtown Seattle. So my wife and I are on a hike, and they're expecting a baby in October. And we ran into a young lady who started to hike with us our age. And somehow the conversation turned around to her life, and she said she's had a really hard life, but her family's really doing well because of this pastor that's been in their life, Pastor Tim. And she said, of Washington Cathedral. I said, yeah, how did you know? And he said, I think he's my uncle. It was Jansen White. And that caused him to say, I got to go back to church. I don't know why I stopped going to church. So next week he's going to be here. It happens to be I'm talking about the DNA of your spiritual DNA, and I'll be able to interview him about the current research because he's one of the foremost researchers in the world on DNA living in our area. And hopefully we're all good and they want to come back and start coming more regularly. But God has a plan that's so deeply rooted in each one of our lives that we're constantly surprised at life. This morning when I was walking in here to church, I looked across the Sammamish Valley and I saw all the deciduous trees, the poplar trees, the birch, the willows across the valley. They're so beautiful now. And I couldn't help but just be amazed at the wonder of it all. Just as Jansen does when he studies genetics, or I do when I look into the stars. Jesus was sent here for one purpose. That was to give you life today. Not someday, but today, because life is very, very short. And you need to enjoy it as Avery grows up, because she's going to grow up fast. After the baby dedication, my granddaughter was sitting next to Eva, and she said, that was really a cool baby dedication for Avery. And I whispered back to her, well, I dedicated you right there in the same spot, Eva. And she said, don't tell me during the service. Be quiet. She said, you can tell me later. They grow up so fast. Life is fast. So all we have to do is try to enjoy it. And hopefully remember why we're here in the first place. If you want to discover life, then we need to remember what God's purposes for our life. And all the time, Jesus staying in John, he'll say, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. Each time it's a purpose statement. I love when anyone says a purpose statement. I love when a little child comes up and says, I think I'm supposed to find the cure to cancer. I said, well, maybe you can love science and research, but who knows where God will lead you. And you have those purposes too. I love when someone goes through a near-death experience and they always bounce back. God's placed inside of you, whether you like it or not, bounce back ability, just like Tigger. And you, whether you want to or not, will bounce back many times. And you'll be better than you were in the first place. You can't go through open heart surgery and not be more full of life than you were before, not be able to love more freely, to express your joy more deeply. God has designed in the rhythms of life that we would be recreated with his love and mercy that goes on every day of our life. That's what happened at Ephesus. I don't have time to tell you the whole story of Ephesus, but it's an amazing story. And the church thrived. It wasn't easy. Paul was beaten and left for dead, but he got up and kept on preaching. It was almost extinguished, and Demetrius, the silver maker, who realized that Christianity is hurting his main pocketbook, which was the worship of the goddess, that there was one of the 7 wonders of the world, from Diana. And so he led a riot. They almost disappeared. But the church of Ephesus prevailed. There's the Council of Ephesus in the 4th century. There's the John the Apostle, the last living apostle, lived out his life in Ephesus, taking care of Mary, the mother of Jesus. So even though this battle with Artemis took place, who was the goddess that they worshiped and made all their money by the end of the 1st century, it was completely a Christian city, no longer following Artemis. So just like that, every church has the opportunity to rebuild or not, and we will rebuild. In fact, the 28th of July, God has led our staff to realize, it's been a long process, because people have been telling me this for a long time, that a way to rebuild would be to bring all the people together for one super service. So on July 28th, we're going to bring the 11 o'clock service and the 9:30 service together at 10:30 for what we're calling the super service. Because when parents come and bring their kids, they need to know other kids are here and that they're not missing everyone all the time. Now, Saturday night, all the people that come Saturday night, it's a strong service. That's the only service time they can come. So that will continue. But 9:30, 11, we're going to come together. Dave's going to have a big barbecue on the 28th, and we're going to celebrate the rebuilding project that God's going to do. Are you celebrating the rebuilding project in your life? Well, let me tell you the second point. The second point is that you need to be filled with life every single day. Not one time in your life, not just when you're born, not just when you're born again, not just when you're filled with the Holy Spirit, not just when you get married or you publish your first research, but today we need to be filled with life. And I've been on the ability to watch amazing people that are refreshed with life. I feel like I want to write a book just about my wife, Jackie. She hates when I mention her in service, but I can't help it. And I watch her refreshed and renewed. I've watched Becky, as she grew up from this age, be refreshed and renewed. And Kathy and Diana. And I could go on to see how God doesn't give up on us. We might give up on us. Everyone else might give up on us. But God doesn't give up, and that's saying a lot. There was a lady that came to our church early on, and it was Linda Skinner's mom, Emily Boyce. And I'm always reaching out to new people, and so when they came in the second week, I was there that week to visit their family. Rich and Linda are very professional, intelligent, they were composed, and they said, well, we can't tell you we're going to commit. We need to check this thing out. But Emily, who was in her 70s, said, I don't need to tell anything. I'm committed. I'm with you. I'll do anything to build this great caring network. And that week, she was going door to door with me. In fact, a German Shepherd knocked her over and tried to bite her, and she said, I won't do anything about it if you promise to come to church. And every time there was a problem, she thought it was all on her to solve the problem. And so her son, Lee, lives in gold country and around Nevada, California border, and he gave her a bunch of gold coins. So when we'd have some big problem, like we need $1,000 or $2,000 or the church is going to go under, she would always think it's all on her. And so she'd bring in these gold coins, she'd give those to me. I said, Emily, it's on all of us, not just on you. She said, well, God told me to give you these coins. Well, she didn't have very much money, and so after she gave them to me, I would go back to her son-in-law, Rich, and I'd say, could you hold these for Emily? She's giving everything away, and retirement's not easy. So the next time we'd have a challenge, Emily would come in with those same gold coins and give them to me. I don't know how many times that we redid that process of her giving all of her gold coins to the church, me giving to Rich, him putting back in the drawer, and she'd say, man, I keep finding, it's like the prophet Elijah, it never runs out. I got gold coins all over that drawer. And she was so full of life. Well, on towards the end of her life, she had a stroke. And that caused a number of repercussions. She had dementia, which was followed by hallucinations and delusions. She couldn't communicate very well. When I went to visit her in the hospital, she had this vision that I was going to jump out of a 747 with bungee cords. And she said, you're taking faith too far. You need to stay in the plane. Don't bring bungee cords. I said, Emily, I'm not going to do that. But finally, they couldn't care for her, and they had to put her in a care facility. And I went to visit her there, and everyone was like she was. They had trouble communicating and trouble seeing reality. And so she was drinking soup with her spoon, and it was down the front of her chin. So I wiped off her chin, and I began to feed her the soup. I said, Emily, I'm going to pray the Lord's Prayer for you. And she stopped, and she looked like she knew what I said. And I said, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. She was one of those Sunday school teachers that I remember when Catherine Bechtel learned how to say the Lord's Prayer when she was a cute little girl. She said she has to say it in front of the whole church. She just loved when someone would learn the Lord's Prayer. Well, she took over. She started to lead, not to follow. And she started to say the Lord's Prayer. She knew it completely by heart. Her mind was becoming sharp again. She was praying healing into her own life. And as she said the Lord's Prayer, what was amazing is everyone else in the room was mumbling to themselves, talking to unseen people. One guy over there dropped his spoon, and then he just stood up tall and straight and started repeating with Emily the Lord's Prayer. Pretty soon, all 15 people in that lunchroom were praying the Lord's Prayer. And Emily bounced back. She received new life. She dreamed more dreams. Lived every day to the fullest. And that's what Jesus is asking us to do. And that's what I'm asking all of us to do. Life's too short to walk through this life wounded by scars that even if they came with good purposes, and I know they do, still they need to be healed. We need to be empowered to be the people that Jesus meant for us to be. Would you stand with me or don't stand with me, I'm sorry. Jackie's going to lead us in a guided prayer.